Welcome to Lonely Planet's podcasts. I'm Tom Hall. Today, I'm talking to Robert Landon, who's been a travel writer for the past 10 years. Robert specialises in the Portuguese-speaking world, and he's finally arrived back in Portugal after passing through Brazil, Macau, Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. For the 6th edition of Lonely Planet's Portugal guide, Robert was looking at northern Portugal. And if Europe has a last frontier, then this really must be it. For the traveller who's seen it all, this region offers a traditional, unhurried way of life, ancient cities which are modernising at a gentle pace, and places to truly get away from it all. First, I'm going to ask Robert about Braga, arguably the capital of northern Portugal, and somewhere that's considered a little bit of a mystery to travellers. Robert, Braga is considered one of Europe's most conservatively Catholic cities. What evidence did you see of that when you were out there?
Well, I remember, for example, there was sort of a fancy furniture store, and in the layouts for all the rooms, they would have a large bloody crucifix.
That sounds that sounds rather gothic and over the top, and it was a similar story throughout the city, was it?
Yeah, I mean, during Easter week, they actually pipe religious music throughout the city, so that you constantly are thinking about the fact that it's religious thoughts, I guess.
And we've actually got some of those sounds, so anyone who's listening to the podcast should be hearing some of the sounds of Braga at Easter. When you were there, whereabouts did you stay?
I actually stayed in I didn't realize this when I made the reservation, but I was actually staying in the convent, the House of Santa Zita, and their calling is actually to create happy homes. And I have to say I had a wonderful time there. It was this place was absolutely, could not have been more spotless and clean. I made the mistake of not eating there. I finally ate there for Easter supper, and it was one of the finest meals I had in 3 months in Portugal, just from their homely kitchen. And they were comfortable with the fact that I was Protestant. It wasn't, we had to have a discussion about that, but it was fine.
And the nuns who are there, what does an Easter dinner in a convent in Braga taste like? I mean, it sounds like a very unusual meal. There can't be too many travellers who've actually had that. What do you eat?
Well, first of all, I should set the stage. Everyone sits at their own table. Each person has their own little table. Everyone is facing front, sort of like as if we were actually monks. And they set the table with elaborate care. Nothing fancy, but everything is very carefully done. The napkins are carefully folded. The nuns serve it themselves. There's always a 3-course meal, but the memorable thing was the goat, which is the traditional Easter meal in that region, because the goat is actually a real delicacy all over Portugal. And it was slowly cooked for hours. It just fell off the bone. It was one of the best things I've ever eaten.
Well, I mean, that sounds like an very, very memorable meal. How did the nuns feel then about hosting a non-believer? You touched on that a little bit. Were they welcoming to you? They didn't throw you out when you revealed yourself?
They were very welcoming to me, but they did announce to everyone that I was not Catholic at one point during the blessing of the house. On Easter Sunday, the priests in Braga, I think this might be the only town in Western Europe that still does this, people put flowers outside the house, and the priest comes and blesses virtually every house in the entire city. And during the blessing, she announced to the group that we had some non-Catholics, and that they were happy to have us. And they were very, very gracious. It was nothing funny, but it was just interesting to me to think that was something to even think about. Not being from a very materialistic culture.
Absolutely. I mean, and it sounds in the context of being in Braga at that time of year that you're actually seeing things that are very unique, and maybe some very unusual and colourful Easter celebrations. I remember you saying that it makes the Braga one of the most popular destinations in Europe for Easter. Can you just describe what goes on there? What is it that makes it such a unmissable place?
Well, like the famous Easter celebrations throughout Spain and Portugal, there's Easter week involves almost every night some kind of celebration in the streets, some kind of parade. Usually, celebration isn't the word because it's actually mostly very solemn until Easter Sunday, including penitents walking the streets barefoot, beating themselves, a man dressed up as Christ dragging the cross on the ground.
Yes, I think we can actually hear some of those noises now, actually. So it's good to be able to illustrate it in that way. And does the whole town turn out to watch this parade?
Everyone comes, yeah. Everyone comes. I remember I was in a restaurant on Easter, I should say Good Friday, and you could not order meat. And in fact, I think it would have been impossible to eat meat in any restaurant in the entire city. It's an incredible thing to see a European city in the 21st century that is so unequivocally devoted. For better or for worse, whatever you feel about it, it's quite a scene.
Well, Robert, you certainly make Braga sound like a very, very interesting place to visit, but you visited lots of other parts of northern Portugal as well. I wonder if you could just tell us, what was your favourite moment travelling in northern Portugal?
Probably my favourite moment was in the Parque Natural de Montesinos, which is on the border with Spain, tucked up way in the northeast corner of the country. And I had been driving around visiting the towns that we cover in Lonely Planet. And I got to one town that actually wasn't in the book that I had read about, and it was described as very charming. So I checked it out. A new road had just been built, and it had absolutely no tourist infrastructure whatsoever. There was no restaurant, there was no hotel. But there was a little museum that was devoted to some archaeological finds. When I got there, I got out of my car, and somebody came up to me, and I guess it was an oddity really to have any visitors at all. And he asked me what I was up to, and I kind of bristled, and I thought, why the hell is this guy asking me what I'm doing here? And by the time I left, he had offered me port wine. He'd showed me where he was drying his meat and his sausages, and gave us all a round of his homemade fire water, and was absolutely the loveliest host I think I've ever had. And it was also just an absolutely beautiful day. If you get to go to Portugal, go in spring when everything is in bloom. The chestnut trees were in bloom. Everything was green, blanketed in green. Just a wonderful time.
Well, I mean, can you maybe tell us a little bit more about that? I mean, I think if people have a perception of this part of Portugal, it's maybe a little like southern Italy, somewhere that might have been slightly cut off over the years. A very poor region of Western Europe. You presumably saw some evidence of this, and also, how it's changing.
Yes, I sure did see evidence of it. I mean, there's still people that commute to work, which is to their fields, in wooden carts pulled by donkeys. Women, there's towns where every single woman is wearing black, and I wasn't sure if that was because they were all widows or because that was a traditional, but not a single woman had any other color besides black.
It seems almost incomprehensible that this is the same country that you're talking about that has such a cosmopolitan, exciting cities like Lisbon and Porto, and has such a prominent place on the world stage. Do you feel that way of life is going to stay that way, or do you think it's changing?
Oh, it's definitely on the way out, I'm afraid. Many of the villages only have residents over 60. The smallest and the most traditional have literally no children, not even any young adults. They've all left. So you'll see, in the fields, men in their 60s, 70s, 80s.
Wow, that certainly sounds a very evocative place, and somewhere that's well worth getting along to sooner rather than later. So I like to see those places, but I wonder, what would you recommend for a long weekend if I was going to this part of the world? What should I do?
Well, for a long weekend, I would say you'd have to stick with Porto. The transportation and roads are in the farthest reaches of the country are difficult. It would be hard to get there for a weekend. Porto is a wonderful city. And it was a big surprise for me. It's a very sophisticated town. There's a lot of new, really exciting things happening. The new Ren Cool House, Casa de Musica, which is a music house just outside the center, is extraordinary. and considered one of the great new works of contemporary architecture. The old center has an incredible mixture of architectural styles, from Roman ramparts to a tango of medieval streets to beautiful 19th century squares. And the people are really what make it special. They are kind as can be. Portuguese are famous for being friendly. In Lisbon, for example, you might get a little some curt treatment at times, but in Porto, shopkeepers walk out of their store and point you in the direction when you've gotten lost. It's really a special place.
Well,
also extraordinary is your ability to go from Porto up the Douro River on cruises. They're boats that ply the river and go up into the port wine growing region. You can go up by a boat and then return the same day by train, which is a train that's the lines have been there for over 100 years, and they follow the curving bank of the river, Douro. Extraordinary.
Right, it sounds absolutely fantastic. And what about if I'm prepared to set aside a little bit more time and I do want to get off the beaten path for a week or two? I mean, I suspect you're going to recommend some of the options that we've already talked about, but what would make a good 1 or 2 week itinerary in northern Portugal?
Well, I think 1 week would allow you to see 1 or 2 of those parks in the north, maybe Porto for a couple of days and one of the parks in the north, or 2 of the parks in the north. I'd say each park deserves 2 to 3 days. If you have more time, you could also check out the Serra da Estrela, which are the highest mountains in Portugal. At the foothills of the Serra da Estrela, there's a town called Belmonte, which is a lovely town in itself that sits on a hilltop and has Roman ruins, medieval ruins. But probably most extraordinary is the fact that there's a community of Jews that have been living there in hiding since the Inquisition. They recently declared themselves to the world as such, and they survived 500 years completely in secret, and there's about 4 or 5 families that would intermarry with each other, and that's how they managed to keep the secret. And the women were actually the bearers of the wisdom. They're the ones that memorized the prayers and passed them down from generation to generation.
That sounds absolutely astonishing, and but then again, if there is a part of Europe where people could hide away for hundreds of years, it sounds like this.